All right, now, sisters, listen up. This is a Thanksgiving sermon of the Lesbian Tent Revival Radio Hour. Now, Thanksgiving is a national holiday to celebrate a dinner party that white colonizers held in collaboration with their native hosts shortly before they turned around and murdered their hosts so they could take over their property. Now, we know this, sisters, because we're synapsing. We can look at what we're told is our history, and we can look at who wrote it and why they wrote it, and we can go looking for who didn't get to write that history and why, and we can find out what their truth is, and we can make connections around all of this and figure out for ourselves what's a truth and what's a lie. And we can connect with our deep selves, and so even if the truth looks like it could hurt us, we can know that we are sisters of the sacred synapse, and that we have a spiritual obligation to the planet to know what we know and to challenge the lies, make the amends, and keep telling the truth, convenient or not. And when Sister Carolyn thinks about Thanksgiving and about what she's grateful for, she is grateful for the fact that she cannot participate in or enjoy a ton of things in this culture. She is grateful she cannot laugh at the stereotypes, that she cannot wave the flag of patriotism when it means supporting an immoral invasion and a war of corporate imperial aggression and greed. She is grateful she cannot participate in the ongoing carnival and parade of women's fashions. She's grateful she does not enjoy the thousands of DVDs that celebrate the violence and dominance of men on this planet, that she does not enjoy any story where the terror of women or of children is a plot point. She's grateful that she notices the gender roles and that what she knows about their toxicity undermines mainstream romance narrative. She is grateful she notices the absence of the disabled, the old, the lesbian, the women of color, and she notices the pedophilia. And she is eternally grateful that she understands with every neuron in her brain that pornography is the sexually explicit subordination of women. Sister Carolyn is grateful, sisters, grateful for what the dominant culture sneeringly calls political correctness. Now, this is a nasty phrase, sisters. It's a nasty phrase for what is actually optimal synaptic functioning. OSF, optimal synaptic functioning. Optimal synaptic functioning means you are fully alive, not repressing, not denying, that you are using your magnificent brain as it was intended to be used, and that you are connecting with other forms of life in a way that is conscientious and symbiotic. So let's all say that now. Optimal synaptic functioning. It means you are at the very top of your game. So let's take a look at this political correctness thing. Now, correct means free from error, in accordance with fact or truth. Now that sounds like a good thing, doesn't it? But what happens when we pair it with political? Well, political has a lot of different meanings, and most of them are suspicious. In the nastiest sense, it means doing something you don't really mean, but doing it to manipulate yourself into a position of power. Like doing right thinking for wrong reasons. Now, I just want to ask you this. What the hell does that mean? How can you think right for wrong reasons? I mean, really deeply think right, but for the wrong reasons. Sisters, I just cannot make that synaptic connection. But the people who are doing the naming are not synapsing optimally. They are only concerned about their own positions. They know that the people who point out the obvious discrimination and racism and ageism and ableism and sexism and homophobia and anti-Semitism and classism of the dominant culture make them feel defensive. And because they're feeling defensive, they experience the optimal synapser as pulling a power play, being a political manipulator. And so they label us politically correct, and they sneer at us when they do it. Well, it seems clear enough that optimal synaptic functioning is the way to go, so why doesn't everybody practice it? Why is the world divided into those who do and those who sneer at it? Well, sisters, there's two reasons, as with most things in patriarchy, and those two reasons come down to the carrot and the stick. That's right, that nasty old carrot and that nasty old stick. And they're not really a carrot and stick at all. They're really just a nasty old you-know-what, because that's what the patriarchy's all about. All right, so let's look at that stick first, the punishment for optimal synaptic functioning. What is it? It's shame, my sisters. It's shame. They try to make us ashamed or embarrassed about our magnificent synaptic abilities. How can they do this? How can it be better to be numb, selfish, and disconnected? Well, the answer to that is simple. It's not. But shame is not about logic. Shame is about the herd. Sisters, we must never forget that we are animals. We are primates, and primates are social animals. Like horses or dogs, we are not like cats. We like to travel in packs. We feel tremendous anxiety when we're separated from the herd. And when the herd is separating itself from us, we will do almost anything to belong again. So this social shame is a huge stick. It can be used to make us buy things we don't want, to make us go along with idiotic situations, to make us keep silent about things that are immoral. And pay attention to this, to keep silent even about things that are hurting us. Social shame makes us ashamed of things we've worked very hard for, like our ability to know the truth and to articulate it. Never, sisters, never underestimate the power of social shunning and shaming. And have some compassion on yourself. It's a powerful tool in the hands of patriarchy. We need to remember historically that the people who protested the most blatantly unfair, outrageous, murderous, and barbaric practices have been called N-word lovers, Jewish sympathizers, and men haters. Sister, it is, and it always has been, a fine thing to stand up to racial discrimination, to feel outrage and horror at anti-Semitism. And sisters, there's nothing wrong with telling the truth about the fact that men are the agents of women's oppression. Not all men, not all the time, but men as a caste globally and historically have been the agents of our economic, political, spiritual, sexual oppression. There is nothing wrong with naming it. It seems crazy that so many good people have been coerced into silence by the use of name-calling, but they have. Never underestimate your biology. Never underestimate that herd instinct, and never underestimate the power of the shame stick. The big shame stick is a powerful enforcer of social norms. And the name of this particular shame stick is political correctness. Well, I say let's get a little shame stick of our own. Let's start finding a name for those folks who sneer at political correctness. Let's call them empathy impaired. Or let's call them folks who are suffering from delusional dominance disorder. I got a sermon about that, DDD, which should get in the DSM, delusional dominance disorder. Own the language, sisters, own the language. And if it's not a language that puts you at the center of your own experience, that makes you visible to yourself, then you are not owning it. And if you're not owning it, it may very well be owning you. All right, so let's move on to that nasty old carrot, the reward. What is the reward for not synapsing optimally? What is that reward? Well, you get to belong. You get to partake. That means you're welcome in the family, in the club, in the organization. You get to sit at the table. You get a piece of the pie. In fact, in corporate capitalist patriarchy, the more you can unplug your synapses, the bigger the piece of the pie. And why is that? Now, synapse with me here, sisters. This is really important. It's about streamlining. It's just like a race car. You get rid of anything and everything that would slow you down. Everything in a race car is designed with one goal in mind. Get there first. And that's how it is in life. If you want to get the promotion first, get the most money first, get a name for yourself, then you might consider designing a life that's streamlined, that gets rid of anything that would slow you down. And sisters, you can go very fast if you don't care about the environment, if you don't care about whose backyard you're dumping your waste in, if you don't care about the lives of the folks overseas who are working in substandard conditions in your factory. You can move faster if you don't have to consider the impact of your choices on future generations or on other species. And like a race car, if you get rid of the passenger seat, you can pick up a lot of speed. Partners and family and community, they really put a drag on your momentum. Now, what happens if you're trying to maintain all your biophilic, and that means life-loving, it's a good word to know, biophilic, right-sized connections as you move through life? What happens if you're staying connected to the web? Well, it means you have to take other things and other beings into consideration. It means you have to stop and solicit a lot of feedback before you implement a major decision. And sisters, that takes time and communication skills. It requires compromise and coalition. You have to negotiate. Everything is more complicated because what makes money today might deplete resources for tomorrow. Some species you never even heard of might become endangered. There are conflicting agendas, conflicts of interest, turbulence, sisters, turbulence, resistance, friction. All these things are going to slow you down. The woman who practices optimal synaptic functioning will never travel as far or as fast as the racer who is single-mindedly focused on one thing and one thing only, getting there first. That carrot of moving fast and far, sisters, it can be tempting, especially when we're in a hurry to pay off a student loan or a mortgage. It can be very tempting when the dogs of low self-esteem are nipping at our heels and we're trying to slow them down by heaving a meaty chunk of achievement at them. It can be tempting when we're in a hurry to escape the rising waters of panic from a traumatic childhood and we think we can get to safety if we can just climb a ladder of worldly success quickly enough. Lots of temptations. I know Sister Carolyn has been in a hurry, a big hurry. But sisters, the patriarchal race is not worth winning. I want to say that again. The patriarchal race is not worth winning. It's a boondoggle. And the definition of boondoggle is work or activity that's wasteful or pointless but gives the appearance of having value. The appearance of having value. The patriarchal race is a boondoggle. The optimal synapser has another definition of winning. It's about retaining her biophilic, and that means life-loving, integrity. When we retain our biophilic integrity, we are advocating for the integrity of the planet. When we retain our biophilic integrity, and how do we do that? Optimal synapsing, connecting up with everything we can. When we retain this biophilic integrity, we may spend our lives moving forward by millimeters, but we are bringing along everyone and every part of ourselves when we do, for every single millimeter that we travel. When we get somewhere with our biophilic integrity intact, all of us get there. The speed racer, when she gets somewhere, only part of her arrives. The racetrack is littered with chunks of herself she had to jettison for the sake of speed, not to mention all the life she ran over along the way. And it goes without saying, she is always traveling alone. Sisters, we're in a nation here that's become a speed racer, and this nation has lost its soul, lost its respect in the international community, lost its credit rating. This nation has left so many things behind in the rush to be first. Well, sisters, it just feels pretty soulless. And we're not first anymore. It's been a boondoggle. So now we know some words. We know politically correct. And we know that for the manipulation that it is. And we know that empathy challenged or delusional dominance disorder are the real problem. And we know the boondoggle, which is believing it's possible to advance individually. Sister, it's not possible because everything's connected. So now I want us all to try and think of a new word. One just for yourself. A brand new word that's never been spoken before to describe that physical and emotional state of well-being we have when we are retaining our biophilic integrity. You just take a minute. You get some syllables you like the sound of. It's a word just for yourself, for success. A word that means you are succeeding with optimal synaptic functioning. You pick a word that works for you and you memorize that. And you think about it 3 times a day. And what does it feel like? When was the last time you felt it? What might you do right now in this instant that might promote your shamantic, webtastic, biophilic integrity? Sisters, never be ashamed of synapsing fully. Never, ever. The planet is too near destruction for that luxury. The synapse is a sacrament, and we have an obligation to practice it, and practice it as if our lives depended on it. You can never synapse too much, and this is especially true when we're talking about oppression. Now, the synapse is what? A privilege, a prerogative, and an obligation. Be grateful you understand the huge lie of Thanksgiving Day. It's really Ingratitude Day on a scale that boggles the mind. What we need is a colonizer's day of amends, where the indigenous people are honored and the ongoing privilege of the invaders and their descendants are interrogated, and where the ongoing post-traumatic stress disorder, the PTSD from generations of genocide, of displacement, of poverty, of the horror of the compulsory Indian boarding schools, of alcoholism are acknowledged, and where we all individually and as a nation take the steps to be accountable. Be grateful for all the holidays we can't take at face value because of our optimal synapsing. Be grateful we know when we look at Memorial Day and Veterans Day, we are never allowed to include the women who are veterans and survivors of the war of violence and terrorism by men against women, the war that has never been named, the war that has never stopped. Be grateful we can bring all our synapses to the table when we consider war, because it is a complicated issue. Be grateful we can remember how the founder of Mother's Day, Anna Jarvis, intended for it to be a holiday that was politically radical and feminist, and how she turned against her own holiday and called for a national boycott of Mother's Day when she saw how it was being sentimentalized for commercial purposes. We can boycott it or radicalize it for ourselves. Be grateful that we understand how the national celebrations and mainstream commercializing of Christian holidays marginalize other religious traditions. Be grateful we understand what it means to ritually worship the birth of a male baby in a world where female infanticide is epidemic. Be grateful we understand what it means when the so-called Mother of God was given no choice about the conception. We can be grateful that we notice why there is no national holiday about women except the ones sentimentalizing us as mothers. We can notice there's no holiday celebrating the sacredness of the baby girl and her relationship to a goddess. Be grateful we can have our own holidays, that we can celebrate the seasons of nature, that we can gift ourselves with our own understanding of what deserves commemoration. And right now, let's see if we can think of 3 national holidays that have to do with women. Birthdays of famous women or historic moments in our liberation movement. Let's really think about this, sisters, because if we can't think of the women who should have days named in their honor, we'll be stuck with the holidays we have, and these are holidays that celebrate an enslaver and another white man who dragged his heels about ending slavery, and a European who was a mass murderer and enslaver. Every single one of us should have about 6 names of women we want to honor and celebrate nationally. And sisters, if you're struggling with those names, don't be ashamed. The patriarchy doesn't want you to know those names. It doesn't want you to know your history or to have role models that empower women. It's no accident or character failing if you can't reel off the names of these women as easily as you can George Washington or Christopher Columbus. So here's your homework this Thanksgiving Day. 6 names, 6 holidays. Get out your calendar and make their birthdays on there. And then find a way to share and celebrate. This is how men empower themselves, sisters. We've got a synapse around that. We have to make sure we have our own holidays. These are our days of commemoration and celebration. Now, there's a high price to pay for optimal synaptic functioning. In terms of the dominant culture, the optimal synapser is seen as one great big huge all-encompassing wet blanket. That's right, sisters. We're all seen as politically correct wet blankets, sometimes even by those who love us. Let's not be ashamed or afraid of that. Let's not try to backpedal it. Let us embrace our wet blankethood. Wet blankets can send smoke signals. Wet blankets can be used to communicate across great distances without the use of technology. Optimal synaptic functioning prevents us from participating in values and distractions of the dominant culture. But what it does is connect us with our deep truth, with all life on the planet, and especially the forms of life who need our advocacy the most. There is joy and purpose in this, sisters. Can you say that? Joy and purpose. There is no joy or purpose in the dominant culture. The dominant culture can only offer superficial stimulation that folks are conditioned to find pleasurable in a cut-off way. What it offers, sisters, is distraction. Why distraction? So we will not notice the devastation going on all around us. But we, my sisters of the sacred synapse, we have joy and purpose. And because of that, we can face the truth, the painful truth, the inconvenient truth, and we can face it with each other. The agents of patriarchal oppression do everything they can to keep us from expressing this joy or enacting this purpose. And that's a torment, sisters. Yes, it is. Sister Carolyn knows it is. And sometimes with all the obstacles, there's a temptation to fall into sin. Now, those of you familiar with the Lesbian Tent Revival, you know that sin, S.I.N., stands for synaptically inadequate networks, torn webs. That's the only sin there is. Synaptically inadequate networks, not thinking right, not connecting fully. That the dominant culture loves to see us fall into sin. Sometimes these torn webs of dissociation and distraction can be very seductive. They can be a temptation, sisters. Yes, they can be a mighty temptation when we're tired or when we want so keenly to socialize with folks who are not synapsing, which is the majority of folks. And sometimes we do fall into sin, and sometimes it feels good. It feels like a break or a time out. But watch out, sisters. Watch out. When we turn off our brain enough to overlook the racism, the classism, the gender roles, and so on, we are training our brain. We are laying down tracks, imagination tracks for the, what is it, Caroline? Casey says, laying down the imagination tracks for the reality train. That's what we're doing. We're training our brains to unplug. For the sake of what? For the sake of the laugh track. For the sake of sociability. And maybe we can afford to do that when the dominant culture is making fun of someone else's oppression, when it's dismissing the needs of a group that's not our own. But what happens when the herd decides our oppression is the joke, the thing to be made invisible? What happens when we try to form alliances with those people we've been trained to tune out? Synapsing is like a muscle, sisters. Use it or lose it. If you unplug your brain every night to enjoy dominant culture TV or to lose yourself in dominant culture, heterosexist culture, romantic fiction, well, how does that affect you when you try to plug yourself back in? Now, sisters, I'm not telling you what to do because I don't want that responsibility. But patriarchy is a force, sisters. Yes, it is. It's a force like a moving train. Just because you're on it, you're traveling, whether your feet are moving or not. Get off the train, plug in the brain, get a new vocabulary, get those new holidays working to describe what's real and what's healthy and what's sacred. Sisters, our lives are sacred all the time sacred. Sister Charlotte Perkins Gilman said eternity's not happening somewhere else, it's happening here all the time. It's going on all the time. And so are our lives, our sacred lives. They're sacred not just when you stop working, not when you have time for it, not when you're doing ritual. Our lives are sacred all the time, and our synapses are sacred. Let's not abuse them. Know what you know, sisters. Communicate with respect, but with truth. And do not be afraid of political correctness. Embrace your optimal synaptic functioning, and then give thanks for it, and blessed be.